Another mysterious story took us to Namyangju City in South Korea. On June 6, 2006, 29-year-old student Lee Yun-hee disappeared without a trace. It would seem that nothing is unusual. People often disappear. However, this case is still stirring the minds of the public. Many people to this day continue to argue and put forward their own versions of what happened. Disappearance. For the first time about the fact that the girl disappeared spoke on June 7th. The alarm was raised by her friends and classmates. Lee did not come to the university for the last classes, which was very unlike her. She was a responsible and efficient student and had never missed a class before. After studying, Lee's friend Min wanted to check on her and went to her house. However, after ringing the doorbell, no one opened the door. Then she didn't bother and left. Later in an interview, the girl admitted that she decided that Yun-hee wanted to be alone and had a day off. It so happened that her acquaintance had been haunted by a series of troubles lately. Therefore, it was possible that she needed time to get away. However, on June 8th, she didn't show up again. This time, Min went with Kim, Lee's friend, and 2 other guys to the missing person's house. There was no other way to contact her. It so happened that a week before the described events, the main character's purse was stolen, and together with her purse, Idaho card, and cell phone. When young people knocked on the door, the dog reacted to the noise from inside. The dog barked loudly, but there was no response from the owner. Since Yun-hee's door had a digital lock, only someone who knew the code could open it. No one present had such information, so Min called the older sister of the wanted woman. But unfortunately, she hadn't heard from her sister and didn't know the code to the door. All this only added to the excitement. Eventually, it was decided to contact the police. Law enforcement officers contacted the owner of the apartment and asked him to come to open the door. Upon entering the student's residence, everyone immediately smelled a foul odor. Life story. Lee Yun-hee was a pretty and colorful girl. She originally studied fine arts and statistics at a women's university in Seoul. However, after graduation, she realized that she had chosen the wrong path. Since childhood, the protagonist loved animals, and even as an adult has 2 dogs for which she took care of with pleasure. Along with the craving for art, she liked to watch documentaries about nature, visit zoos, farms, and animal shelters. Therefore, having received a diploma, she was not afraid to start from the beginning and finally decided. At the age of 25, the girl decided to connect life with veterinary medicine. Parents did not immediately support their daughter. The traditional family believed that at such an age, it was time for her to get married and have children. However, Lee was a modern girl, so she wanted to build a career for a start. Therefore, in 2003, she entered the higher school of veterinary medicine. The new specialty liked the student and was given easily. At the same time, in order to be independent, she began to work part-time. Lately, the girl has been tutoring younger students, as well as children of teachers. In 2006, when the study was coming to an end, Lee was preparing for final exams. It is understandable that trying to combine study and work, she was very tired. But circumstances demanded it. A robbery. On June 2nd, Lee was returning home after a private class. She was walking at a slow pace, absorbed in her thoughts. Suddenly, 2 men on a motorcycle sped past her at breakneck speed. As she recovered from her fright, the student realized that the intruders had stolen her purse. Several witnesses to the incident tried to help and went after them. Their van managed to chase the motorcycle for a while. However, once the thieves turned down a narrow alley, the chase had to be called off. The culprits were not punished, and Yun-hee was left without her important belongings. After that, she warned everyone she knew that she would be out of touch for a while. The girl was so upset that she told her friend, "I can't believe the world can be such a horrible place." However, at that moment, she didn't know even half of what she was going to experience. The situation at Lee's apartment. Lee's apartment was empty. What was noticeable was the mess made by the dogs. 2 puppies were lying on the floor. In the absence of water and food, they were dehydrated. Apparently, the animals were trying to find something to eat. Therefore, scraps of papers and clothes were lying everywhere. It became clear that the pets had not been walked for several days, hence the pungent odor that filled the room. Min noticed her friend's conspicuous backpack standing quietly in the corner of the room. Since it contained the essentials, Yun-hee never went anywhere without it. This indicated that she left the apartment in a hurry or for a short time. The condition of the house did not seem suspicious to the police. At first glance, nothing was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. Therefore, assuming that the wanted girl had left voluntarily and would return soon, the police left. However, such arguments did not satisfy her friends. First, Lee would never in the world would not have left the animals to starve. Secondly, she could not disappear without telling anyone. So the company contacted Lee's family members. The family confirmed that they hadn't heard from her in days. Dissatisfied with the police officer's conclusion, Min and her friend went to the station. Unfortunately, due to the slowness and poor handling of the investigation, Korean law enforcement agencies have been repeatedly admonished for their actions. So the young people decided to insist on their own and officially report their friend missing. Evidence. At this time, 2 of Lee's other friends stayed at the house. They wanted to wait for her parents and discuss everything. Not wanting to embarrass the missing person's relatives, the guys decided to clean up the apartment. They washed the floors, threw out the trash, and even washed dirty laundry. In general, destroyed all the evidence that had taken place. In addition, it was later learned that upon arrival, Lee's sister threw away the cigarette butt found on the veranda. She did so because she didn't want to embarrass her sister in front of her parents. They would be very upset to know that their daughter smokes. But the thing is, Yun-hee's acquaintances unanimously claimed that they had never seen it. Perhaps in this way, another solid piece of evidence in the case was destroyed. Afterward, the guys were very sorry that wanting to do better only aggravated the situation. The young people explained that at that time the police had not taken up the investigation and had not warned them not to touch anything. When Lee's parents arrived in the evening, they inspected the apartment. Dong, the girl's father, reported that several other things were missing along with his daughter. The first thing he named was a hammer. The man explained that he personally insisted that such a necessary item was in the house. Lee Yun-hee had always laughed about it and kept it in plain sight. The other missing item was an antique coffee table. The student was particularly fond of it, often eating at it and using it as a bedside table. It was unclear to everyone where the girl could have gone, as well as where 2 unrelated objects had disappeared to. The unknown painted a frightening picture. The last party. That day, in addition to the police report from Lee's friends, there was another one. The concerned parents of the missing girl decided not to delay. It was already obvious that enough time had passed since the alleged disappearance. She was last seen on June 5th. That was when Yun-hee and her classmates finished their last practice of the semester. The young people were going to celebrate the significant event. For this purpose, they even invited the teachers. Obviously, not everyone agreed, but some still decided to keep company with a group of 40 students. The protagonist was upset that she had suffered another failure because of an unsuccessful, in her opinion, operation on an animal. Due to this, she had no desire to go to the party. Some even claimed that she locked herself in the restroom and cried. Perhaps before graduation, the diligent student simply lost her nerve. Therefore, she was so critical of herself and saw the world in pessimistic colors. Nevertheless, her friends managed to calm the girl down and persuade her to join the party at the karaoke bar. By 10 o'clock in the evening, Lee's mood had noticeably improved. Everyone gathered in the pub. They ate, drank, remembered university everyday life, danced and sang songs. They were supported by the heroine of the story. CCTV cameras recorded how at around 2:30 at night she left the toilet and left the celebration. It was noticeable that the girl was upset about something. However, the rapid departure was noticed by a 27-year-old guy named Kim and went after her. According to the man, he asked what happened. Since young people were close since their school years, Lee confessed and complained to her friend that someone was watching her in the toilet. However, she did not give any details. Kim was concerned for his friend. He knew that she was already frightened by the recent attack on the street, so he offered to carry her backpack and escort her home. Lee lived in a rented apartment about a 20-minute walk away. Kim later told investigators that he was unable to walk his buddy to the door. She said goodbye to him in one of the dark alleys. However, the young man still decided to wait until the lights came on in the windows of her house. After making sure that the girl was not threatened, he turned around and went to his house. It should be noted that the guy lived nearby. On June 6th, the country celebrated a national holiday, Memorial Day. Therefore, the absence of news from her did not seem strange to anyone. However, it was after the party that no one saw Yun-hee. The beginning of the investigation. During the investigation, curious facts were established. On the morning of June 5th, about 4 o'clock the day before the disappearance, one of the classmates came to see Lee. He said that he was fixing a loose leg of the coffee table. He told the investigation that Lee did not want to throw it away, so she asked him to fix it. He stayed in the apartment for about half an hour, he said. After the short repair, the couple went to the university. He was not present during the celebration and never met Lee again. Some claim that the young people were in a romantic relationship, but there is no concrete evidence of this. In parallel, the relatives of the missing woman conducted their own search. One day, Lee's father, Dong, in search of any clues, explored the neighborhood where his daughter lived. Suddenly, between two garbage cans, the man noticed a familiar table. However, the tabletop and the unscrewed metal legs were lying separately. The relatives assumed that it was damaged during the events that took place in the apartment. The find was submitted for examination. It is quite possible that on the ill-fated night, Lee was the victim of a brutal attack. Her father was worried that she could have been killed because of the hammer he had given her. It is possible that the perpetrator, having gotten rid of the table, took the tool with him or hid it somewhere. Stalker theory. Amazingly, during the inspection of Lee Yun-hee's home, the experts were unable to find any fingerprints, DNA, blood, or any other evidence. So thoroughly had Lee's friends cleaned the apartment. Therefore, the police decided to resort to searching for eyewitnesses. Since the walls of the apartment building were quite thin, someone could surely hear something. However, none of the girls' neighbors reported anything unusual. Many of the residents refused to engage in any conversation at all. At the same time, one elderly woman said that a few days before Lee's disappearance, she herself had been harassed. Someone, presumably a man, followed her to her front door and then stopped. The woman decided that opening the door would give a chance for an attack, so she turned sharply and came face to face with the stalker. She noted that the hood made it difficult to see his face. However, her actions frightened the unknown man. He turned around and left. It should be noted that in South Korea, pushing has become widespread. This term means unwanted, intrusive attention to one person by another or a group of people. Very often, law enforcement officers record reports of women who report repeated incidents. It is not uncommon for a stalker to stand at the door and wait before leaving. This further creates feelings of anxiety and fear. Often, sexual offenses are triggered by stalking. Therefore, on October 20th, 2022, a law came into effect that made stalking a crime. The sanction of the article provides for imprisonment for up to 3 years. Previously, it was qualified as a misdemeanor and punishable by a fine of $70. Some believe that a similar situation could have happened to our heroine. However, her case could end tragically. Later, this version found confirmation. In the house across the street, there is an apartment from which there is a clear view of Lee's windows. Whoever lived there could unobstructedly observe her actions. During the investigation, it turned out that the premises had been empty for a long time. However, an inspection revealed several empty cigarette packs and used tissues. Unfortunately, the DNA extracted was not suitable for examination. Nevertheless, it indicated that someone had visited the apartment periodically and stood at the window. The investigation is ongoing. Detectives interviewed all the party participants. Unfortunately, None of them knew what had happened to the girl during the celebration, much less after it, except, perhaps, Kim, who escorted her friend to the alley and waited until she went home. The sincerity of 21 people was tested on a lie detector. All of the subjects passed, but it is still worth noting that this method is not always reliable. However, the polygraph has been used in the country since 1950 and is trustworthy. In addition, task forces with search dogs searched the entire city, as well as the nearest mountains. Volunteers put up tens of thousands of flyers asking for any information. Later, Lee's parents sold all their property and offered 10 million won for information about their daughter's whereabouts. However, all was in vain. A new lead. The missing girl's family and acquaintances wanted to believe that she would return alive. Perhaps because of the stress of her experience, Yun-hee decided to disappear for a while, forgetting her responsibilities to her parents and the pets she left at home. Maybe she's the one who threw away her favorite but broken table and her unwanted hammer. And there would be an innocent explanation for the dried napkins in the apartment across the street. But that last hope vanished as soon as the cybercrime experts got involved. They scrutinized Lee's computer and recovered the deleted files. Some gruesome details emerged. On June 6th at 2:59 a.m., about the same time the girl was supposed to return home, someone gained access to her desktop. He opened Naver, an internet portal used by 70% of the country's residents. He then typed the following phrases into the search: sexual harassment, contact the police, and 112. The work session ended at 3:02 a.m. The computer itself was manually shut down at 4:21 a.m. Specialists assumed that the missing student came home and sat down at the computer. Based on searches, she was sexually harassed at a party or on her way home. And since she didn't have a phone, she looked for a way to report it online. However, after 3 minutes, her actions were interrupted by someone. Experts also found out that on June 8th, between 3:15 in the afternoon and 5:21 in the afternoon, someone turned on the girl's computer again. At the same time, the unknown person deleted the history of messages in the messenger from 10:48 p.m. on June 4th until 3:04 a.m. on June 8th. To do this, he used a special program known in narrow circles. After it is not possible to restore the chat history. At the same time, it shows that a person who is well-versed in computers acted. 2 days later, someone again logged into Lee's account on a popular music site and even checked his email. Using the IP address, police were able to trace the location of the connection. It was a motel in the town of Kunsan, which is 119 miles away. After reviewing the CCTV cameras from that day, detectives found no signs of suspicious behavior or traces of the missing student. However, this fact indicated that she did not disappear of her own accord. Someone was skillfully cleaning up the traces of the crime that had been committed. The first person who comes to mind is Kim, who by a strange coincidence was at Lee's house at the time of the mass deletion of correspondence. If you remember, he stayed with a friend to wait for Yun-hee's family to arrive and did some cleaning. This gave him the perfect opportunity and enough time to cover up the unwanted actions. Amazingly, when investigators asked the boys if they had turned on Lee's computer, both said they didn't remember. In fact, there were no witnesses, no traces, and no significant leads in the case of Lee Yun-hee's disappearance. Possible evidence was destroyed during the cleaning and clearing of the chat history. Had the girl's body been found, it is almost certain that the perpetrator would have been caught. For the most part, the victim keeps key evidence of the crime. To this day, however, the student's whereabouts remain unknown, as does her condition. She is most likely dead, and her remains are safely hidden or managed to get rid of them forever. These circumstances lead to another version of what happened: a mad professor. It is known that the faculty where Lee studied collected animal carcasses. This was done so that students were engaged in autopsy and study. At the end of the study, the remains were collected and sent by the agency to a special incinerator. Before this, the biomass was packed in specialized bags. According to the company's rules, the collectors were not allowed to look into them, It should be noted that the sight is unpleasant, so they would not do it themselves. Approximately 88 pounds of animal remains are placed in the incinerator daily. However, investigators learned that 2 days after Yun-hee's disappearance, about 242 pounds were incinerated. In other words, much more than usual. The educational institution worked on different animals: dogs, cats, pigs, and cows. However, according to the records of June 8th, there were no large animals. The dilemma arises: what else was burned that day? Could the extra weight have belonged to the missing student's body as well as other evidence? Unfortunately, this question remains unanswered. It was not possible to conduct a genetic examination, as all the ashes were destroyed. Assuming that Lee's body was indeed burned, it means that it was done by someone who killed her and had access to the room. For example, one of the faculty members, Professor Moon, was of great interest, the same man whose children Lee was studying with when her purse was stolen. During the interrogations, several people reported that Moon sometimes showed attention to a beautiful student. He openly flirted with her, unashamed of his status and age. The man was also present during the celebrations at that party and tried to sit next to Lee, but she moved away from him, calling him a creep. It was obvious that she was not accepting his advances. Initially, Moon said he left the event early and was home around 2 a.m. Then, when other detectives noticed that he had left after Lee, he changed his statement. It is quite possible that the professor molested her and then stalked her. Afraid of ruining his reputation, he may have silenced Yun-hee. It's possible that he followed her that night, then broke into her apartment and killed her. Then he moved the body to the crematorium. He could also have taken the student to the campus by force and burned her alive. Either way, there's a lot of speculation. On the one hand, a stranger obsessed with Lee. He could have stolen her purse to get his hands on the object of his adoration and watched from the apartment across the street before or after the event. It is possible that it was he who attacked, kidnapped, or killed the poor girl. On the other hand, there are a lot of questions about her buddy Kim. Dong stated that there was a suspect they were sure of and pointed him out. There's no video footage of the young men walking home together after the party. Also, no one present saw Lee and Kim leave. It's hard to believe that the girl didn't want to be escorted all the way to the door and said goodbye in an alley at night. Everyone knows that the guy has been in love with her since high school. There is an opinion that he even went to university because of her. At the same time, Lee sincerely trusted him and loved him in her own way, accepted his gifts, spent time with him. However, Lee's feelings were not what he would have wanted. Many joked that Kim became her third puppy. Later, one important detail came to light. It turns out that the young man knew the code from the door of the beloved. In her absence, he repeatedly came to the apartment, looked after the dogs. However, he did not tell about it, so as not to defame the girl in the eyes of others. By our standards, South Korea is still a rather strict country. At the same time, it looks suspicious. His motive could have been simple jealousy. He could have snapped when he found out Lee had a boyfriend. He may have secretly followed her and then went up to her apartment. There was an argument during which Kim broke the coffee table and took his girlfriend's life. He then decided to stay behind to clean up the crime scene. At the same time, no charges were brought against him. Moreover, in an interview, the lead detective hinted that he didn't think the guy was involved in the crime, and despite popular belief, the most likely suspect is Professor Moon. The man could have used his official position to lure a student he liked into the lab and do something terrible to her. As of 2017, Kim was married, had children, and his own business. Lee's father still accused him of being involved in his daughter's disappearance. He even organized several demonstrations outside the man's private clinic. To defend his honor, Jim was forced to file a defamation lawsuit. With the court's decision, Dong was banned from approaching Kim's building. To this day, the man claims that many media outlets have defamed his name. 18 years have passed, but the search for Lee still continues. In time, her photos and age image were made public. The missing person's parents have grown old. But before leaving this world, they want to calm down and know for sure. whether their daughter is alive or not. Over time, any pain is dulled, even from the loss of a loved one. But there's nothing worse than being left in the dark for years. What do you guys think? Is Lee Yun-hee alive? And if not, who really killed her? When a friend turns into a ruthless criminal. You've probably heard the saying, with friends like these, who needs enemies? This is often said about those who only pretend to be good friends, but are ready to betray, set up, deceive, and even commit a crime against you at any moment. Such vile actions often hide some selfish motive, but their consequences can be utterly unpredictable, and the bitter disappointment in a close person who betrayed your trust is usually the least of the evils. The case of Sarah Stern shocked even veteran police officers with the cynicism and cold-bloodedness with which her closest friend, whom she had known since childhood and trusted implicitly, dealt with the unfortunate young woman. It was this friend with whom the student shared her future plans and a significant secret that no one else knew. By doing so, Sarah essentially signed her own death warrant, as from that moment until the tragic end, the young man lived with plans on how to make her disappear forever, while remaining above suspicion. Surprisingly, this crime could have been prevented if those around had taken the perpetrator's words and actions more seriously. The criminal even laid out his plan on paper, presenting it as a script for a horror movie. But let's dissect this complex story from the beginning to understand what drove such a good friend. Who was Sarah Stern? Sarah Elizabeth Stern was born on March 24, 1997, in the small town of Neptune City in Monmouth County, New Jersey. She was the only and dearly beloved child in the simple family of Michael and Susan Stern. Due to health issues, Mrs. Stern couldn't have more children, so the parents poured all their love into their long-awaited daughter. Sarah grew up as an active, cheerful, and very sociable child. She performed on the school theater stage, was passionate about photography, drew well, and was involved in sports, competing for the local swimming team and playing softball. She dreamed of becoming an artist or designer and was preparing to apply to a local specialized college when a terrible tragedy struck her family. In the autumn of 2013, when 16-year-old Sarah had just graduated from high school and started college in the field of art she had dreamed of, her mother passed away. The woman had fought a long battle with cancer, and it seemed several times that the disease had receded, but the insidious illness returned with new force and ultimately won. This loss was a huge shock for the entire family, especially for the young girl who was always very close to her mother. For a while, Stern fell into depression, but she tried to support her father with whom she lived and who also had a hard time. They also lived with a dog named Buddy, whom the girl adored. Gradually, life began to improve. Sarah made plans for the future, and after graduating from college, she wanted to apply to a prestigious national university in New York. But before that, she dreamed of traveling the world, particularly planning to visit Canada and perhaps even live there for some time. The abandoned car. Michael Stern often had to travel out of state for work, sometimes for weeks at a stretch. But he never worried about leaving his daughter home alone because she was a grown, independent young woman and their town was considered quiet and safe. However, in December 2016, when he flew out for another business trip, trouble came knocking at his door. On the night of December 3rd, 2016, around 2:30 a.m., a call came into the police station from a concerned man reporting a car abandoned in the middle of the Belmar Bridge along Highway 35. The area was quite deserted, rarely traversed by anyone at night, making the solitary, empty vehicle immediately suspicious. The caller was a taxi driver, taking a shortcut home over the old bridge on the outskirts. He noticed the car parked by the side and stopped to see if anyone needed help. Finding the cabin empty and no one around, he called the police, suspecting the driver might have come here to end their life by jumping into the water below, a sadly not uncommon occurrence at this spot. Responding officers noted the keys left in the ignition. There were no signs of blood in the car, nor any signs of a struggle, leading to the initial theory that someone came to the bridge with the intention of voluntarily leaving this world by jumping into the river below. The next step was to find out who owned the abandoned old silver sedan. A database check revealed the car belonged to one Lily Stern, a senior American citizen who recently celebrated her 85th birthday. She lived in the same town, about 10 kilometers from where her car was found. Officers promptly visited Miss Stern's home to understand how and why the elderly woman's car ended up on the bridge at night. Lily was found at home, alive, well, and surprised by the police visit. She explained that due to poor eyesight, she hadn't driven for years. Instead, her 19-year-old granddaughter Sarah was the one who drove the car. Concerned, Lily immediately tried to call Sarah, but her phone was turned off. She then gave the officers her son's address, where he lived with Sarah, noting that only Sarah should be home since her father was away on a work trip and wouldn't be back until the next week. The mysteriously disappeared student. Sarah was not at home, and the back door to the house was found open, a worrying sign. An initial sweep by the police inside revealed nothing suspicious except for a dog whining locked in one of the bedrooms. There was no indication of any crime taking place. Belongings were in order, and there were no signs of struggle, bloodstains, or any evidence of an intruder's presence. By then, news of the situation had reached Michael Stern, and he was on his way home on the first available flight. The homeowner confirmed everything was in its place, and nothing was missing. Moreover, he stated that all of Sarah's personal belongings were also at home, including her passport, driver's license, and even her mobile phone, which she never parted with. The police shared their initial thoughts with Michael, suggesting his daughter might have gone to the bridge with the intention of jumping, and asked if he had noticed any signs of suicidal tendencies or self-harm attempts. Michael admitted that after his wife's passing, Sarah had gone through a period of depression, but with the support of family, friends, and her studies, she managed to recover. Furthermore, she had big plans for the future, dreaming of becoming a designer, wanting to travel and see the world. Nonetheless, on the night of December 3rd, the student vanished from her own home, and a few hours later, her car was found abandoned on the bridge. These were the established facts. Sarah was officially missing, and the investigation had to figure out who she was in contact with that day, what conversations she had, and who saw her last. Testimonies from the first witnesses. It soon came to light that on December 2nd, Sarah Stern had spent nearly the entire day with her best friend Liam Nakatazny, whom she had known since childhood. Liam turned out to be the last person who saw her, potentially shedding light on this mysterious case. Thus, law enforcement quickly decided to speak with him to gather details and try to reconstruct the events of that day. Upon arriving at the Nakatazny residence, police were met by Liam's mother, who informed them that her son was sleeping off a night shift. At the officer's request, she woke him up. Seemingly confused about the situation, Liam was surprised to learn about Sarah's disappearance. He confirmed that they had spent most of the previous day together and agreed to go to the police station to provide his statement. Liam shared that they had gone to college together in the morning, but decided to skip the last 2 lectures since it was Friday, and they wanted to relax. After class, they went back to her place, played video games, chatted, and shared their future plans. They left the house twice that day, once to grab food from a nearby fast food restaurant, and another time to stop by a local supermarket. Around 7 in the evening, he left Sarah's house to head to his night shift at the 24-hour store, and didn't see her after that. When asked if Sarah had been experiencing any psychological issues or other difficulties, Liam revealed quite a bit. He said that Sarah had been deeply depressed since her mother's passing, teetering between wanting to end it all or run away and start anew. He also mentioned that Sarah had had issues communicating with her father, struggling to find common ground. Liam didn't dismiss the possibility that Sarah might have taken her own life, but noted that shortly before disappearing, she had seriously considered moving to Canada and had even exchanged some money. His claim was confirmed by finding Canadian dollars in a bedside table drawer in Sarah's room, though the amount was so small it wouldn't have covered much. Another close friend and former classmate of Stern's, Preston Taylor, who had been her date to the high school prom and kept in touch after graduation, also gave a statement. He corroborated Liam's account, adding that Sarah was depressed and speculated that she either ran away to Canada or jumped off the bridge. By the end of the conversation, he was in tears, expressing how much Sarah meant to him, search for the body, questioning other witnesses. The theory of Sarah fleeing to Canada, or anywhere for that matter, was almost immediately dismissed since she couldn't have left the country without her passport. Law enforcement then focused on the grimmer theory and organized a massive search effort in the river. The search was complicated by the strong current in that area, which could quickly carry a body miles away from the bridge. Divers were deployed, special equipment was used, and police, along with hundreds of volunteers, scoured both banks of the river, looking for remains or any of Sarah's belongings. Among the volunteers actively participating in the search were also Liam and Preston. Unfortunately, despite all efforts, no trace of Sarah was found. Therefore, law enforcement decided to continue questioning people who knew her and were close to her. That's when a peculiar discrepancy emerged. According to friends and classmates, Sarah was not depressed. She was in great spirits, and none had heard about any problems with her father. On the contrary, she always spoke of him warmly and lovingly. However, after Sarah's disappearance, Liam and Preston behaved as if they had lost a close relative, garnering sympathy from many. But soon, people started to notice that their behavior was odd, as if they were performing for an audience. The two had become very close, but this development occurred about a month before the incident. Therefore, the police decided to take a closer look at the friends and re-interview them, the adopted brother of a wealthy heiress. When Liam was brought back to the station for further questioning, he appeared deeply distressed. The investigator inquired once more about his relationship with Sarah and Preston. Liam shared that the three of them grew up on the same street, attended the same school, and were closely knit, sharing their deepest secrets and dreams. Preston even took Sarah to the prom, but there were no romantic feelings between them. Liam mentioned that he and Sarah were not just friends. He considered her his sister. They even listed each other as siblings on their social media profiles. Sarah had no secrets from him, and she had told him that her mother had left her a significant amount of cash, most of which was kept in the safety deposit box. Allegedly, Sarah didn't trust her father, who also claimed a right to the funds, so she stored the money in the bank, but planned to retrieve it soon to run away to Canada. When this story was relayed to Michael Stern, he was quite surprised and offered his version of events. According to him, his wife began saving money for their daughter's future, for education, a wedding, or a home, from the moment Sarah was born. The cash was kept at home, stored in a shoebox, with many bills being old and some quite worn, though no one thought much of it at the time. After his wife passed away, the father handed the box of money to Sarah, advising her to deposit the old and worn bills in the bank. Sarah followed his advice, depositing some of the money into her checking account for everyday expenses and renting a safety deposit box for the rest. She decided to use it to pay for university after finishing college and to travel the world. Michael sternly denied having any claim to the money for his own purposes. What is the best friend hiding? The revelation that the missing student had a large sum of money led investigators to consider the possibility that someone might have targeted her for financial gain. The investigation then decided to check her safety deposit box and bank transactions. It turned out that a few days before disappearing, Sarah had withdrawn a substantial amount from an ATM and had also visited the bank to take out some cash from her box. Another surprise awaited the detectives. Bank surveillance footage revealed that Sarah hadn't gone to the bank alone, but was accompanied by Liam, who obviously knew about Sarah's banking activities. They decided to question Liam again, specifically why he hadn't mentioned this bank visit, which occurred on December 1st, His hesitation was noticeable, but he explained that Sarah trusted no one but him and had asked him to accompany her to the bank because she was afraid to carry a large amount of cash back home. His explanation seemed logical, and his demeanor was natural. Moreover, it was discovered that a house across from the Stern residence had a security camera that captured the street and part of the neighbor's yard. Footage from this camera confirmed that Liam stayed at Sarah's house until 7 in the evening, then left for work and did not return, while the silver sedan left the garage around 11 at night. A plot straight out of a horror movie. About a month after the girl's disappearance, another acquaintance of hers named Anthony, who had been out of town for several weeks and was unaware of the events, walked into the police station with a bizarre and chilling story. It turned out Anthony had been in the same class with Sarah, Liam, and Preston, and after graduating, he dived deep into studying filmmaking, maintaining communication only with Liam, who also had an interest in cinema. Anthony recounted that about a month and a half before Sarah vanished, Liam visited him, and one evening they brainstormed ideas for a horror flick aimed at teenagers. Liam quickly came up with a story about a girl who secretly tells a friend about a large sum of money she possesses. The friend, after gaining her trust and learning all the details, strangles her and dumps her body in a turbulent river. Anthony liked the plot, and they even wrote a couple of pages of the script that evening. However, Anthony soon moved on to another project, forgot about the story, and then left town for a real film shoot where he was working as a camera assistant. Upon his return, Liam unexpectedly called him, inquiring if the police had visited him or summoned him for questioning. Surprised by such questions and learning of Sarah's disappearance and the circumstances surrounding it, Anthony decided to go to the police himself. A horrifying confession. After hearing the new witness's testimony, the authorities suggested Anthony draw Liam into an open conversation and try to elicit a confession from him. Anthony agreed, and a plan was devised. He would invite Liam to collaborate on a project that required renting professional camera equipment, which they ostensibly couldn't afford. Knowing the suspect's aspirations of being in a movie, it was likely he wouldn't miss such an opportunity and might offer the money he took from Sarah. Liam took the bait almost immediately, but suggested they meet in person to discuss the details. A hidden camera was installed in Anthony's car, and he was instructed to carefully coax a confession out of his friend. When the two met, and Liam got into Anthony's car, he looked around cautiously, as if afraid there might be someone else inside. He then handed over an envelope containing $2,000 in old bills, asking if it was enough to rent the filming equipment. Anthony nodded affirmatively, and then inquired where Liam got so much old currency. Liam hesitated, then admitted the money was Sarah's, which he and Preston had taken from her house because the dead don't need it. He didn't go into further details, but his admission was enough for the police to arrest him and Taylor on suspicion of crime. The Accomplice's tale. Preston quickly started cooperating with the authorities, striking a deal with the prosecution. He claimed he did not participate in the act itself, but helped his friend cover up the evidence and dispose of the body. According to Preston, Liam began devising plans to take Sarah's money as soon as he learned of its existence. It turned out that Sarah had kept her inheritance a secret even from her best friend for a long time. But when she seriously started planning her trip to Canada, Liam inquired how she intended to fund it, prompting Sarah to reveal the money left by her mother. Liam convinced her that such a sum was safer in a home safe than a bank vault and insisted she withdraw the cash. He even borrowed a significant amount from her right before the tragedy, the same money she had withdrawn from the ATM. When Sarah's father was out of town on a business trip, Liam decided it was time to put his plan into action. He roped in Preston by promising him $25,000. McCatasney decided to handle the dirty work himself, requiring his friend only to help him erase any traces. He convinced Sarah to withdraw the money, failing to check how much she took out. They spent the next day together, with Liam waiting for the right moment. He locked Sarah's dog in another room to prevent it from defending its owner. Approaching her from behind, he began to strangle her. However, the crime proved more challenging than expected. Firstly, the athletic and strong Sarah resisted fiercely, leading to a struggle until she lost consciousness. Secondly, just when he thought she had passed, she would show signs of life. It took the perpetrator about half an hour to be sure Sarah Stern was no longer breathing. Afterward, Liam left her house, heading to work, leaving Preston to step in. He snuck into Sarah's house through the back door, out of the camera's view, dragged the body to the garage, and tidied up the room. A couple of hours later, Liam returned, took a small safe from Sarah's room, placed the body in the car, and drove off in such a way as to avoid being captured by the neighbor's camera. He headed to the bridge where Preston awaited in his own vehicle. Together, they disposed of the body in the river, wiped down the steering wheel, and drove away in Preston's car back to Liam's house to split the loot. They faced a huge disappointment as they found only $10,000 in the safe, not the $100,000 McAtasney had anticipated. However, they decided not to spend the old bills immediately to avoid suspicion. The accomplices buried the safe in a local park, spending only the money Sarah had withdrawn from her account. Trial and verdict. Despite Preston's confession, Liam McAtasney steadfastly denied any wrongdoing, attempting to shift the blame onto his friend. McAtasney's lawyer also insisted on his client's innocence, suggesting Taylor acted alone. Moreover, as the body was never found and the circumstances of the disappearance remained unclear, there was a lingering possibility that Sarah was still alive, having vanished without her documents, money, belongings, or phone. A search of Liam's house turned up nothing except a small key fitting the buried safe, identified by Preston. The trial lasted over 2 years, but despite the absence of a body and McAtasney's confessions, his guilt was established through the combination of evidence. The script described months before the incident, the key to the safe found in his home, his words captured in Anthony's car, and the old bills he handed over. Additionally, fingerprints of both Preston and Liam were found inside the safe, and a colleague testified that McAtasney was absent from work for a few hours that night, asking to be covered. Liam McAtasney was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His accomplice, who did not directly participate in the act, received an 18-year sentence for obstruction of justice and hindering the investigation. Preston Taylor is eligible for parole no sooner than 15 years into his sentence. The body of college student Sarah Stern remains undiscovered to this day. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends and a young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique. And all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals, and in it, he was considered a strongman. a player who is able to break the opponent's ribs, only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed through his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow, what was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks.
So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched, lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered, for crying out loud."
And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing? "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another, less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play." Tom really was suspicious that evening, said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Aunt Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, And for some reason, he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage, and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly. But he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece, that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with two women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then, when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the third and fourth time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you?" Or, "Haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go, but the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say, and for this work he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping, but the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door, and when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck, but it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face
and if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did.
After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time, and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. "If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you." Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. "And who killed her?" the detective asked. "I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer," Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination, and the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout.
He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, His lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there, and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury. The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kin. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while, her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and the measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Thomas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Auckland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not found connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? The police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver, and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Okahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Carmen Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8th, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Auckland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Wenning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, we have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court, said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. We will never forgive him for what he did to our family, said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers, added her stepfather Wayne. Callahan's attorney Stuart Grieve said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing. We are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. An innocent victim of her spouse's perverse passion. They say that an adult is simply impossible to re-educate because it is a formed personality with its views, way of thinking, preferences, character, and temperament. However, some women are sure that patience and pedagogical talent can work wonders. More experienced women realize that it is important from the very beginning to consider the man who is next to her, to study his shortcomings, and to understand whether she can live together with them, because falling in love and passion will pass, and the negative qualities with age will only worsen. If it is not about some minor shortcomings, but about real problems, such as addictions, pathological tendency to lie and violence and so on, it is better to run away from such a person without looking back. But in women often in such cases manifests the rescuer syndrome, an acute desire and irrepressible desire to help at the cost of their own well-being. It is this syndrome ruined a young British woman named Vicky Roberts, who almost 3 years struggling for her love, trying to re-educate her cheating husband with sadistic tendencies. Unfortunately for the girl, all her efforts turned out only pain, humiliation, and cruelty. Vicky and Michael Roberts. Vicky Roberts, born Victoria Smith, was born in September 1984 in the county of Cheshire, in the northwest of England. She was the younger of 2 daughters in a rather conservative and deeply religious family. Together with her sister, she attended a Christian school and also practiced music and sang in the choir. People around her described her as a very kind, friendly, and helpful girl, always ready to help others. After graduating from high school, Vicky went to university and at the same time got a job in one of the stores of the chain IKEA to pay for her own education. It was there that the girl soon met a young man named Michael Roberts, with whom she first started a friendly relationship. The new acquaintance was only a year older than Vicky. He also got a job at IKEA in parallel with his studies, and he also played sports, carefully watched himself, and was able to make a pleasant impression on others. At first, the sociable and charismatic Michael seemed too talkative and overly intrusive to the modest Vicky, but he quickly managed to gain her attention and favor. It is worth saying a few words about Michael and his family. He was born in June 1983 in Warrington, Cheshire, and was the eldest of 2 sons in the family of a prominent chemical engineer. Parents brought up their children in strictness, and high expectations always laid on the eldest heir, who studied well at school, grew up ambitious, purposeful, and able to achieve what they wanted. The guy always had a lot of friends. He could easily become the soul of any company, but most of all, he was proud of his victories on the love front. Michael had a bright and attractive appearance, was tall, trim, with a good sense of humor, and the ability to show himself at his best. To everything else, this handsome man was also very intelligent, well-read, could easily support a conversation on any topic. Parents from childhood indoctrinated the eldest heir that he is the best, the most beautiful, intelligent, and will certainly succeed. All this probably provoked in the guy narcissistic disorder, which with age progressed. At the same time, Michael was always very afraid to upset his dad and mom, and therefore did everything to be the perfect son for them. and meet all their expectations. Roberts never had a permanent girlfriend. He regularly changed girlfriends and mistresses, could spin several novels in parallel so that none of his passions did not realize that she was not the only one. The guy was confident in his irresistibility, could find an approach to any girl, and he really liked to conquer unavailable girls. This process he perceived as a kind of game or competition. Just such a modest and inaccessible girl was Vicky, which Michael decided by all means to conquer. At first, she stubbornly kept her distance and refused even innocent offers to walk after work or drink coffee somewhere. Smith spent almost all her time studying, and on weekends she went to church, so she didn't even think about dating, let alone any relationship. It took Michael a few months for Vicky to finally agree to go out with him. He was sweet, charming, touchingly courted her, gave her flowers, gifts, and little surprises. He even invited her to a family dinner at his parents' house, who liked Vicky very much and immediately approved of their son's choice. Vicky believed he was serious and gave in. He became her first man and remained the only one. She was truly happy around him, and it seemed like fate to her. Michael also seemed to fall in love and was ready to settle down, but it didn't last long. 50 Shades of Michael. From the outside, their romance seemed perfect. They were both young, attractive, full of energy, ambition, and made huge plans for the future. But soon Vicky realized that her chosen one has one peculiarity, namely, an irrepressible sexual appetite and passion for experimentation in bed. At first, he did not put too much pressure on his chosen one in this regard, fearing that Vicky would leave him, but as soon as the guy realized that she would not go anywhere from him, he, as they say, opened the cards. The modest and religious girl was literally shocked by what was happening, but she was head over heels in love with Michael, and therefore trusted him, and for a long time did not tell anyone about what was happening in their bedroom behind closed doors. In addition, her lover made her an official marriage proposal, which she gladly accepted, sincerely believing that after the wedding everything will change and the chosen one will stop his experiments. Soon, one of Vicky's closest friends began to notice that she carefully disguises and hides bruises and small bruises under her clothes. She brought Smith into a frank conversation and asked if her fiancé was beating her and if she needed help. Vicky tried to deny everything, but then still admitted that all these marks are the consequences of intimate experiments Michael, who had a special passion for binding, the use of various toys and devices. She also secretly told her friend that they have with the chosen intimacy happens up to 5 times a day, while he still remains hungry and unsatisfied. Michael considered himself a skillful lover, and intimacy for him was a kind of art and a way of self-expression. Sometimes he made concessions when Vicky refused to participate in some completely crazy and even dangerous experiments, but in most cases, he still managed to persuade the girl in love with him. Unplanned pregnancy. After defending her diploma, Vicky decided to change jobs and was soon hired as an account manager at a logistics company. Michael also quit IKEA and got a job as a sales consultant in one of the stores of a large retail chain, selling phones, laptops, and other electronics. He almost immediately became one of the best employees because thanks to his charisma, communication, and persuasive skills, he always exceeded sales targets. Soon, the new young employee was promoted to senior salesman, and the management seriously considered his transfer to the main office. But before that, he had to undergo training and improve his qualifications. Michael enjoyed attending training sessions, going on business trips to London, and was very proud of himself. He seemed to have forgotten all about his young fiancée, and only remembered when he needed intimacy. They didn't talk about each other. They hardly ever went anywhere together, and outside the bedroom, Vicky seemed to cease to exist for him. At the same time, he began to have affairs on the side with colleagues, clients, and just casual acquaintances. Michael was literally obsessed and addicted to intimacy, and intimacy with different women, and constant new victories on the personal front were an important part of maintaining his self-esteem. At this time, Vicky discovered that she was pregnant and happily broke the news to her fiancé. They had already delayed the wedding, and it seemed to the girl that now Michael would hurry things up. But the news that he was going to be a father only made Michael angry and mad. He immediately began to insist that the child should be gotten rid of because they are still so young and they have their whole life ahead of them, and with offspring can wait. Vicky was shocked by such words, but flatly refused to terminate the pregnancy. Then the groom decided to press her in another way. Michael began to convince the bride that such news will cause anger in her religious parents, because their youngest favorite daughter lived with a man and got pregnant without being married. However, according to him, the termination of pregnancy will be hidden from everyone, and after the wedding, they will certainly have children. For Vicky, it was a difficult decision, but her chosen one had a real gift of persuasion, so that a few days later she gave in to persuasion and went to the hospital. Unfortunately, it was not without complications. Vicky for a few days stayed in the hospital, and then it took her almost 3 weeks to recover her health. For all this period, the doctor categorically forbade her to have an intimate life, and Michael, learning about it, went into a rage. Then Vicky finally realized that he had mental problems and a real addiction to sexual contacts. Beloved literally went crazy without intimacy and began to leave the house every day, explaining it with urgent matters at work. Vicky guessed that he was looking for intimacy on the side, but sincerely hoped that everything would change once they got married and she would help him get rid of this addiction, a loveless marriage and an adult mistress. The engagement lasted almost 2 years, and the man, apparently, did not even intend to marry the chosen one, because the current state of affairs suited him quite well. He had a fiancée who faithfully waited for him at home and fully served him in the household, and numerous mistresses on the side which he regularly changed. Vicky always took him at his word, and even if she found out about his cheating, she always forgave him, as long as he promised that it was the last time and he would not do it again. But time passed. Vicky began to insist on marriage, as she wanted a full-fledged family and children. Also, this question was increasingly raised by her parents, but most importantly, the wedding was insisted on by Michael's parents, whom he really did not want to upset. Modest and sweet Vicky, they liked them very much, and they considered her a great couple for their son, and were constantly interested in when they will get married and make them happy with grandchildren. Not without the help of their parents, the couple organized a lavish wedding with a white dress, limousine, and a beautiful away ceremony. The newlyweds looked in love and happy. It seemed that they had a long life ahead of them. But hardly any of the relatives guessed about the dark side of the man, with which his young chosen one was already so well acquainted. The newlyweds settled in a large and cozy house in the prestigious area of Warrington, not far from Roberts's parents. Michael did not love his spouse, however. Marriage made him normal in the eyes of relatives and others. Vicky never complained to anyone about his strange predilections and constant cheating, and he could continue to change mistresses like gloves. At work, he was quite successful, got another promotion, and was making good money. After being transferred to a new office, Michael's direct boss was a certain Carrie Hall, the head of administration at Phones, 4U. She was 10 years older than him, had been divorced for a long time, and was raising a son on her own. At the same time, Carrie was quite attractive, well-groomed, and, as her position required, determined and strong-willed. For a long time, she did not pay any attention to the signs of attention that she was given by a young subordinate. However, for the guy it became a kind of signal to action. He sought to achieve this woman, connecting all his natural charm and eloquence, and after about a month, Carrie reciprocated. Lovers began to meet regularly in hotel rooms, and their relationship the woman later described as turbulent, passionate, and full of experimentation. Carrie was a mature, self-confident woman. She was undoubtedly flattered by the attention of such a young man, and she was also not opposed to trying something new.
So Michael could realize with her those fantasies which did not dare his modest wife. He constantly lied to his wife about being late at work, attending corporate trainings and the like, and told his mistress how unhappy he was in marriage, that this union was a mistake of youth, and said that he was ready to divorce, but his wife does not give him a divorce. This relationship with Carrie lasted more than a year, but since the woman had no illusions about Michael, she did not insist on divorce. and she was quite satisfied with their meetings in hotels, marks on the body, and dangerous games. After the beginning of relations with Michael, Carrie began to give preference to buried clothes with long sleeves and high throat, which was unusual for her. The woman was actively engaged in sports and always liked to show others her stunning figure. And here suddenly, completely changed her style. Once Hall admitted to her close friend that her lover loves to experiment in intimate terms, and sometimes these experiments go beyond reason. As evidence, she showed a bite mark on her chest, which Michael left in a fit of passion. Also on her neck there were blue marks from squeezing by his hands, and on her wrists there were marks from the ropes, with which the boyfriend liked to tie her so that she was completely in his power. The friend was horrified and suggested that Carrie go to the police, but she refused, noting that all this was consensual, and in most cases, he warns her about what he is going to do, but the process itself can get out of control. For example, Michael loved to strangle his partner, convincing her that it would increase the pleasant sensations of the process. But a couple of times he was so much carried away that she lost consciousness. Vicky was very afraid of such games with strangulation, but every time she succumbed to her husband's persuasions and believed that one day he would get tired of it. He would leave his cruel and painful experiments, or she would get used to it and would perceive them as something ordinary. Unfortunately, neither his wife nor any of his mistresses even tried to stop Michael. Open correspondence and a love letter. Vicky had guessed about her chosen one's affairs on the side even before they were married. She, most likely, even realized that he was addicted to it, but sincerely believed that something was about to change, and her love and care can turn daring and loving Michael into an exemplary family man. But after the wedding, the situation only worsened, and the young husband himself denied his cheating, and he did it very convincingly. Vicky decided to conduct her own personal investigation and looked into her husband's phone while he was sleeping. There she found numerous correspondence Michael with Carrie and several other girls, which he did not even bother to delete. Their content was quite intimate, moreover. With some girls, the guy exchanged explicit photos. This came as a shock to Vicky. She packed her things and decided to move in with her friend for a while. She did not tell her parents and sister anything about what was happening, afraid to upset them. So her family was sure that Vicky was happily married. Besides, religious relatives would have insisted on a divorce when they learned of her husband's infidelity. But after all, Vicky was in love and didn't want to break up with her husband. Leaving, she wrote Michael a touching letter in which she confessed her love for him and called the main man in her life. At the same time, she admitted that she knows about his cheating and does not want to put up with it and therefore leaves, but gives him time to think about it and will not yet file for divorce. She wrote it all by hand on paper and left it on the refrigerator with a magnet. Michael was not touched by the message or saddened by the departure of his wife, but he did not want to lose a quiet and submissive woman who always waited for him at home, fully served in the household, and tolerated any of his antics as well as peculiar predilections. That same evening, he followed Vicky to her friend's house, picking up a large bouquet of flowers on the way. Michael on his knees apologized and begged her to return to him, promising that from now on she would be his only woman. Vicky once again believed, or rather she wanted to believe, and returned to their home, a new mistress.
Naturally, Michael did not leave Carrie and continued to meet with other women, but for a while he was extremely careful and even tried to come home for dinner, which his wife carefully prepared. He hid his phone, deleted correspondence, and even changed the password from his social networking page. At that time, he began to have an affair with a new young female employee of the company, Karen Wilson, not stopping the relationship with Carrie. At that time, the girl had a fiancé, and she was preparing for the wedding, but Michael began to persistently pursue her, making himself a miserable lover. He was so attracted to the new object of the hunt that after 2 months, he decided to break off the relationship with 33-year-old Carrie Hall, which he was tired of. The man told Karen a proven legend about how he is unhappy in marriage, and for the sake of her ready to leave his wife. Soon she surrendered, and between them happened intimacy right in the office, and a week after that, she broke off the engagement and waited for the lover to respond. However, Michael was not going to divorce, but also to interrupt the connection with a new mistress he did not want, and therefore just lied to her that he had already filed for divorce and moved to live in the house of his parents. Fatal blackmail. Vicky soon suspected that her spouse continued to cheat on her, and this time decided to act for sure. She took Michael's phone while he was in the shower, but could not find anything there, because he had taken into account his previous mistakes and deleted all text messages, and on the page in the social network now had a different password. Then Vicky waited until her husband fell asleep and took his work laptop, which he always carried with him, and on which, as it turned out, he did not leave his account in the social network. There, Vicky found correspondences with an already new girlfriend, in which her husband confessed his love to her, claimed that he was divorcing his wife and living with his parents. It was a real shock for her. She took screenshots of the love and intimate messages exchanged between the couple and saved them on her laptop so that she could have proof of her husband's infidelity. Vicky also looked in her husband's wallet, where she found several folded checks for hotel rooms. In the morning, she presented all this to her spouse, and for the first time in their entire time together, she gave him a scandal. Michael was discouraged. He tried to apologize again and promised that it would not happen again, but Vicky suddenly said that she would tell his parents about everything, hoping that they would be able to talk some sense into him, since she could not do it. Michael was literally mad from such threats. He did not want his parents to know anything, and slapped his wife. Then Vicky got up and said that she would go to them immediately, and then headed for the door. Her spouse caught up with her, hit her twice in the head with a heavy jewelry box he grabbed from the dressing table, and after she lost consciousness, he squeezed her throat with his hands until she stopped breathing. The man felt no pity or remorse. He wrapped the body in a blanket and packed it into several large garbage bags, and then carried the gruesome bundle into his garage. Michael then quickly cleaned up the house, packed and removed most of his wife's belongings, and immediately called Karen, whom he invited over. They had dinner, had fun in the house, where a couple of hours ago Roberts killed his own wife, and then made love in the bedroom, where, in fact, everything happened. Ran off with her lover? The very next day, Michael informed his parents that his wife left him, having run away with another man. To do this, he personally went to their home and literally sobbed on his mother's shoulder, showing her messages from his wife, which he himself sent from Vicky's phone. The messages said that she had fallen out of love with him, met another man, and decided to live with him. Parents, as they could, consoled their son, and sincerely bewildered how their sweet, kind, and religious daughter-in-law could do such a thing. In parallel with the phone of the deceased, Michael sent messages and her parents, which said that she fell in love with another, left with him, and asked for now not to bother her and give time. Naturally, the couple Smith immediately rushed to call their daughter to find out everything and hear her explanations, but the calls were constantly rejected, and in response only came messages asking to give her time. This seemed very strange to Vicky's parents, and they went to Michael's house to talk to him, but his story only raised more questions and doubts. And after they found out that Vicky was not showing up for work without saying anything to anyone, they decided to go to the police. An investigation, a gruesome discovery, and an escape. On the 1st of December 2009, Michael bought a shovel, several meters of rope, as well as rags and detergents from a hardware store. However, he did not manage to get rid of the body, because on the same day the police visited him at home. Then the police could not find anything suspicious, but Michael's behavior and story raised a lot of questions and doubts. However, the strangest thing was that they did not pay attention to the huge package in the corner of the garage during the inspection. In the house, there were no clothes, documents, and personal belongings of the missing woman, which could indicate that she had left, but Vicky's laptop was in the bedroom, and the police seized it for inspection. There, they found screenshots of Michael's correspondence with his mistresses, which Vicky had saved, and then decided to make a geolocation request of Vicky's cell phone, from which regularly came messages to her husband and relatives. and then it turned out that the phone had been in her and Michael's marital home all along. After that, law enforcers again visited the house of Roberts and conducted a more thorough search, finally unwrapping a strange package in the garage. The find shocked everyone present, but then it was discovered that Michael, who had been walking with the police all this time, disappeared somewhere right under their noses. He took with him a wallet with cash, so that several days he managed to hide without giving himself away. Arrest, trial, and conviction. When the money ran out, Michael came to one of his mistresses, whose name was Lavinia Talley, and asked to live in her house for a while. In the evening, the girl heard from the news that her lover was wanted on charges of murdering his wife, and immediately, without hesitation, reported to the police about his whereabouts. At the time of his arrest, Michael was crying and said he was innocent of anything. The man insisted that his spouse died during their intimate games when she asked to strangle her with a robe belt, and he overdid it. However, forensic experts found that firstly, the woman was strangled with her bare hands, secondly, she was attacked from the back, and thirdly, there are 2 extensive hematomas on her head received during her lifetime, which can definitely have nothing to do with intimate relations. The trial of the perpetrator began in January 2010. The defendant kept insisting that his wife's death was the result of an accident and hoped for leniency. However, the autopsy results presented by experts proved that the man in cold blood hit his wife twice on the head and then strangled her and hid the body in the garage. Michael Roberts was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, the court left him the possibility of applying for parole after 17 years in prison. That is, the criminal has a good chance of being released in 2027. Jeremy Ogden, a detective with the Hobart, Indiana Police Department, leaned over his desk, staring at a manuscript that had kept him busy for years. The diary bore witness to a tragic story involving 53-year-old Christopher Reagan. Christopher Reagan was born in Detroit, Michigan. In this city he lived his early years, and there he received his education. When he reached the age of 20, he decided to join the ranks of those who were willing to defend their country. Christopher found his true calling and devoted himself to the service of his country. With honor and devotion, he stood guard over the peace of the citizens. This choice forever determined his fate. Christopher was sent to a military base located near the cozy town of Marquette. Here, on the military base, not far from Marquette, fate brought Christopher together with Terry, a young teacher from the cozy town of Iron River. Recalling their acquaintance, Terry told the detective how, being young, they saw each other and sympathy arose at first sight. Young people often met on the streets of the city and embarrassed to say hello, and over time began to walk together. Communication became more and more frequent and closer, and eventually grew into friendship. For several years they remained only close friends because the service in the army did not leave Christopher the opportunity to build a serious relationship. At some point, Chris decided to leave the military service and move to Traverse City, a city located in the same state, but far from the place where his beloved lived. However, the distance did not become a barrier to their feelings. On the contrary, communication between them became even closer, and in December 2012, Christopher proposed to Terry to start a long-distance romantic relationship. Both were single at that moment, knew each other for many years, and always observed the line of propriety. Terry happily agreed. After a short time, the lovers realized that they had many common interests: a love of nature, a preference for a measured lifestyle, a thirst for tranquility. That's why Iron River became the perfect place for both of them. The couple made the decision to live together. Christopher moved in with Terry, found a job at a factory producing parts for military ships, and soon he had his own subordinates. Life was shaping up in the best possible way. However, after 2 years of living together, problems began in the relationship between Christopher and Terry, and the passion gradually faded. As young people did not try to overcome the difficulties of this difficult period, it became obvious that they would not be able to keep their connection. Eventually, they made the difficult decision to part ways. The parting was peaceful, and the former lovers managed to maintain friendly relations. After breaking up with Terry, Christopher could no longer continue his life in her house, so he decided to rent his own place. As time went on, it dawned on him that he wanted to change where he lived as well. Iron River seemed too small, and Chris began looking for a more dynamic and vibrant city. He responded to job openings in various locations by sending out his resume. In October 2014, fate presented Christopher with the opportunity to start a new chapter in Asheville, North Carolina. Here he found not only a job, but also a cozy place with many picturesque natural attractions. In a new city, Chris was about to start his life anew. On October 14th, Christopher wrote Terry that he had taken the day off and would be free the next day. The reason was a doctor's appointment, after which he suggested they meet up and go for a walk, as they had often done when they still lived together. However, on October 15th, he did not contact his girlfriend. Terry was worried. She tried calling him for several days. Concerned, she contacted mutual friends, but they knew nothing.
10 days later, a worried Terry filed a police report about Christopher's disappearance. The report was accepted, but the police were quick to comfort Terry, assuring her that people sometimes disappear for a while and then return, sometimes even ending up in other places. At the police station, Terry also revealed that Christopher had recently received a job offer in North Carolina. For the police, this was reason not to be too concerned, suggesting that he may have made it to his new residence and decided to start a new life, severing all ties to the past. To avoid making idle speculations, investigators launched a detailed investigation. They managed to identify the company where Christopher had recently started working and contacted one of the employees to find out what he knew about Christopher. However, astonishingly, no information could be obtained. Christopher had not shown up for work in 10 days. The police speculated that he might have been the victim of an accident, given his frequent solitary trips outdoors. Search forces headed into the local woods, trying to check everything on the paths Christopher liked to explore. Specially trained dogs were deployed to reinforce the search, but unfortunately, no trace of the missing man was ever found. Terry then suggested a visit to Christopher's former apartment in order to make sure that no accident had happened to him. Perhaps traces could be found there that would indicate his current whereabouts. Agreeing to Terry's suggestion, the investigators went to the home of the missing Christopher. Upon entering the apartment, the detectives were struck by the chaos inside. Items were strewn across the floor, closets were left open. Their first thought was that Christopher was probably just a sloppy person and had forgotten to clean up. Terry, however, immediately refuted this idea, claiming that her ex-boyfriend was not that sloppy. The detectives began to lean toward the idea that all of this might be connected to the crime. After inspecting Reagan's home, it was decided to start searching for him on a larger scale. The police looked carefully through the neighborhood and finally found Reagan's car outside the city limits, about 8 miles from Iron River. It was unlikely that he had left his car there intentionally. They had to break one of the doors to get inside the car. There was nothing suspicious in the interior. On the seat were ordinary clothes, such as those often found among locals: hat, coat, gloves. However, one of the policemen carefully noticed on the front passenger seat a small piece of yellow paper with a route written on it. It was decided to follow the route indicated in the note. There was no specific address on the paper, but the route was described in detail. Terry explained that despite living in Iron River, Christopher still hadn't learned the names of streets and roads, so he wrote down directions like turning at a bus stop or driving past a gas station. Terry shared that, judging from the detailed notes, this was the first time Christopher was headed to this location. The group of detectives followed the route indicated on the piece of paper. This route took them to a neighboring town. Stopping in front of the house noted in Christopher's notes, the investigators knocked on the door. They needed to find out who lived there and why Christopher had traveled that way. The door was opened by Jason Cochran, an overweight man who was surprised to see uniformed men in front of his house. His wife, Kelly, soon appeared. The officers informed the couple that they were investigating the disappearance of Christopher Reagan, and a piece of paper found in his abandoned car pointed to this address. Kelly candidly revealed that she worked with Christopher at the same plant, and they got along well, and were even friends. She had not been in contact with him in recent weeks, but in mid-October, she tried to contact Chris via text messages. She received no response and assumed he had gone to North Carolina for a new job. Kelly also mentioned that Christopher had been having health issues and may have just decided to start a new life. Investigators found themselves in a quandary. They did not understand why the route that led to the Cochran home was written down on a piece of paper found in the missing man's car.
Despite the lack of answers, the couple expressed their willingness to cooperate with the investigation. After a brief questioning, without getting the information they needed, the detectives left their home. The next phase of the investigation was a conversation with Christopher's co-workers. The detectives went to the factory where they interviewed workers and supervisors. One of the supervisors revealed that Christopher was having an affair with Kelly Cochran, and rumors had been circulating for months. This statement sparked interest, and investigators decided to re-interview the Cochran couple and clarify what was really going on in their relationship. In the end, Kelly admitted that she and Christopher did have an affair, but she was unable to disclose it the previous time because of her husband's presence. She and Jason, she said, have an open relationship, and Jason is generally okay with his wife's affairs on the side. However, the topic was sensitive and may have hurt his feelings. Christopher's co-workers, for their part, refuted Kelly's words. They stated that Jason was far from approving of the affair, and there was no loose relationship in the Cochran family, as Kelly claimed. Following Kelly into the police office was Jason himself. A conversation with him unequivocally revealed that he was adamantly opposed to his spouse's infidelity. This position made him a suspect. Nevertheless, the lack of conclusive evidence made it impossible to conclude that he was involved in Christopher's disappearance. The officers had no choice but to release Kelly and Jason from the police station. The investigation dragged on for 5 long months, and the mysterious mystery remained unsolved. On March 5, 2015, the case was placed in the hands of a new investigator who immediately began actively working on it. The first order of business, Hobart Police Department Detective Jeremy Ogden began a thorough analysis of the Cochran family's history. Kelly had met Jason while still in high school, and immediately after graduation, they began living together. The two were completely different in personality. Kelly was open, socially adept, and loved to talk. Jason was known for his reticence and taciturnity. He never started a conversation first, only answering questions asked of him. Despite these differences, the couple decided to get married. After the wedding, the couple started their own company, providing swimming pool maintenance services. The business was modest, but it brought them a decent income. Most of the pool maintenance work was taken on by Jason. The constant stress and strain took a toll on his health. The man began to have back problems, and every day he felt heavier and heavier. One day he realized that he was unable to continue the business. That's when Kelly took over all the work of running the business. It was a difficult period, but she trusted that her husband would soon recover and return to his duties. While his condition was getting worse day by day and the medical drugs were not bringing the desired relief, Kelly looked for all ways to help her husband recover. One day, she learned about a plant that offered hope for Jason's recovery. There was a chance, although its use in medical practice had only recently begun. It wasn't available everywhere, especially since it was banned in the state where they lived. For Kelly and Jason, the only way to get the drug was to move. They chose Michigan and moved to Iron River Township in 2014. Here, Jason was able to consult with a doctor and get a prescription for a miracle plant. Finally, his agony was going to be over. So, in early 2014, the plant, which specializes in manufacturing parts for U.S. warships, brought a new employee, 34-year-old Kelly Cochran, who had moved with her husband Jason to the area. Kelly made every effort to ensure her family's financial well-being, and the couple took a job at the same plant where Christopher Reagan worked.
Christopher and Kelly found common topics of conversation and over time became close friends. This companionship was of particular importance to Christopher, who had recently been having difficulties in his relationship with Terry. After reviewing all the evidence, the prosecutor made a strong case to a judge in Michigan to obtain a search warrant for the Cochrans' home. After successfully obtaining a ruling, the very next day, March 6th, the prosecutor sent a team of investigators to the couple's residence. The search of the Cochran house was conducted with special care, trying to find any traces indicating the possible involvement of Kelly and Jason in the disappearance of Christopher. However, all efforts were in vain. The only important find was a book, authored by Jason. He used a pseudonym from the world of video games. The title of the work caused a smile, but its content was horrifying. In this dark and violent book, Jason described murder scenes of everyone who had ever wronged him. The detectives read the book from cover to cover and noticed one of the characters that matched Christopher's characteristics exactly. Suspicions about Jason grew stronger. Perhaps he wasn't making up the crimes, but was inspired by real events he had committed. Given the heightened suspicions, it was decided 3 weeks later to conduct another search of the Cochran house. The investigation hoped to uncover evidence that might have been missed in the previous search. When police officers drove up to the Cochrans' home, they found that no cars were in sight and the yard and driveway were empty. Attempts to knock on the door were fruitless. No one opened the door. It turned out that immediately after the initial search, Kelly and Jason had left town and moved to another state, Indiana. Their quick getaway had investigators worried because they feared they might not be able to find the crucial evidence they had been hunting for months. It was especially important to collect DNA samples from the suspects. That's when Michigan police officers contacted their Indiana counterparts, asking them to take DNA samples instead. Ready to help, the Indiana police officers headed to the Cochrans' new home. The couple, for their part, did not object at all to the procedure, as there was no legitimate reason to charge them with murder. Nor was there any evidence of the victim's body itself. The investigation was gradually losing steam, leaving less and less chance of solving the disappearance of Christopher Reagan. Time passed, and suddenly, on February 22, 2016, a call rang out at the police station in Hobart, Indiana. On the other end of the line was a worried Kelly Cochran. She tried to explain that her husband, Jason, was not breathing, but in her state of panic and emotional shock, it was difficult to provide specific details. Rescuers arrived on the scene where Kelly, in a state of utter panic, obstructed doctors. However, it soon became clear that Jason would no longer require assistance. He was sitting in a chair, his face burning with fire as if from extreme overheating. The doctors were forced to confirm his death. The body was sent for forensic examination. Kelly was handed over to a police patrol who took her to relatives who lived nearby, down the same street. Determined to find out the circumstances of what happened, investigators searched the Cochrans' new home. During the search, one of the officers discovered a syringe needle at the foot of the marital bed. After evaluating the condition of Jason's body, the investigator concluded that his death was caused by abuse of illegal substances. However, the forensic report came as a surprise to the detectives. Although Jason was found to have an excessive amount of illegal substances in his system, the forensic results pointed to something more shocking. Jason's death was caused by strangulation, as confirmed by bruises on his neck and face. Thus, Jason, the prime suspect in the kidnapping of Christopher Reagan, was himself a victim of the crime. This discovery led to new questions and a re-examination of the evidence. Forensic experts immediately turned their attention to Kelly Cochran, who seemed to be the link between the two crimes. Now she was to become the prime suspect not only in Christopher's disappearance, but also in her husband's murder. This investigation became an even more complex puzzle. On February 23, 2016, Kelly Cochran was invited to the police station to testify in Jason's murder case. During the interrogation, the investigators asked her directly about her involvement in her husband's death and whether she had administered excessive doses of illegal drugs to him. Despite the lack of concrete evidence and pressure from the investigators, the young woman did not confess to either the murder of her husband or the kidnapping of Christopher. Several months later, investigators have not been able to find convincing evidence of Kelly's guilt, as well as the grounds for a possible arrest. During the course of the investigation, Detective Jeremy Ogden encountered Walter Hammerman, a close friend of Jason's, who, upon learning of the horrific incident from Kelly herself, immediately rushed to the police. Walter emphasized that illegal drugs could not be the cause of Jason's death, as he knew his friend well, and he would certainly tell him about any changes in his life. Moreover, Jason had been using only medicinal herbs with the sole purpose of getting rid of the back pain that had accompanied him for a long time. However, Walter noticed that his friend had been in a difficult situation lately. In March last year, Jason shared his worries with him, saying that he and Kelly had to travel to Indiana because of suspicions of the Iron River police in their involvement in the disappearance of a man. Everything that had happened had greatly affected Jason. He had even become depressed and tried to take his own life, which required serious treatment. Walter also noted a distinct change in his friend's behavior. Kelly began to take more and more control over his life. It seemed that Jason was constantly on edge. Whereas before the boys could spend hours playing video games together, Jason now began to avoid parties as soon as his wife returned from work. This information became an important link in the investigation and allowed investigators to understand what was going on in the Cochran family. After the medical examiner determined that Jason had died from strangulation, Detective Ogden began to devise a cunning plan to force Kelly to tell the truth about the fate of Christopher Reagan. It was decided to use Walter, Jason's close friend, as bait to lure Kelly into a trap and force her to make a mistake. Walter accepted a difficult role. He was to become a tool in the hands of the investigation and play out a performance in front of Kelly Cochran. On March 12, 2016, he called Kelly while under the watchful eye of police officers equipped with a listening device. He was to give Kelly a fictitious letter from Jason that supposedly contained something important. Walter also told Kelly that her husband had given the letter to her shortly before his death, with the condition that he not open the envelope and immediately send it to the police if anything happened to him. Suddenly, Kelly asked Walter to drop the idea. And this came as a real shock to both Walter and the police officers who had been monitoring the situation. However, despite this revelation, detectives still had no direct evidence. In the weeks that followed, Kelly was subjected to numerous interrogations by investigators in an attempt to get the truth out of her, but she continued to deny her guilt. On April 26, 2016, it suddenly became clear that Kelly Cochran had managed to slip away from the scrutiny of investigators. It was like a mockery of justice. Detectives immediately joined forces with police officers from Iron River and Hobart, announcing a federal manhunt for Kelly Cochran.
Walter Hammerman, who cooperated with police, was shocked and frightened. He feared that the perpetrator would never be found and that she could once again get away with it and might later attempt to attack him. Kelly's phone was off, as if she was enjoying a game of cat and mouse with the cops. After 2 busy days full of anxiety and turmoil, Detective Jeremy Ogden managed to find out that Kelly Cochran was off the west coast of the United States. She had cleverly eluded the police and traveled to Kentucky, to the town of Wingo, located more than 6 hours away from Hobart. A detective contacted the local police, warning that upon discovering Kelly, they should arrest her, exercising extreme caution given her potential danger. On April 28th, police officers located Kelly at her cousin's home. The arrest team, responding quickly to the information, proceeded to the house. Knowing that Kelly could be dangerous and prone to escape attempts, they acted quickly and without warning. That afternoon, Kelly Cochran was apprehended and taken into custody. Detective Ogden arrived in Wingo, where he resumed interviews with the suspect along with investigators from Indiana and Michigan. After speaking with Kelly Cochran, everything became clear. The story of her relationship with Christopher Reagan was much deeper and more serious than everyone thought. She felt true love for him. Kelly dreamed of leaving this cursed city and starting a new life with him. But everything changed on October 13th, 2015, when Jason found out about her cheating. They were fighting, and Jason remembered the pact the newlyweds made on their wedding night. According to that pact, the cheater was obligated to kill his lover if his cheating became known to his other half. Kelly claimed that she had never taken that agreement seriously. She thought it was a joke. But Jason was serious and warned her that he would do it himself if she didn't keep her vow. Kelly didn't want to take that responsibility, but she helped Jason commit this horrible crime. On the evening of October 14th, 2015, Christopher Reagan arrived at the home of his mistress, Kelly Cochran. It was a moment he wanted to enjoy their encounter while Kelly's husband was away. The young woman offered him dinner, then a pleasant time and intimacy. Everything was going according to plan. Their evening promised to be special. The lovers had dinner and, according to Kelly, went up to the second floor of the house, but their solitude was interrupted by Jason's sudden appearance. He burst into the bedroom with a rifle in his hands. Panicked and terrified, Christopher realized he was in a death trap. Jason, without hesitation, took aim and fired a shot at Christopher's head. The bullet mortally wounded him, and Chris died on the spot. Afterward, under Jason's direction, the accomplices dragged the body into the basement and began dismembering it using a hacksaw. Christopher's limbs and head were detached from the torso. The perpetrators placed the remains in several trash bags and then disposed of them by dumping them in the woods near the village of Crystal Falls. They drove Christopher's car away from the house to ward off suspicion. The couple thoroughly cleaned the house to remove evidence of the crime. The couple were accomplices to a terrible crime. Kelly Cochran also did not hide her participation in the tragic death of her husband. According to her, the idea of revenge was born when Jason, having discovered that Kelly had a lover, decided to commit the crime. Kelly, in turn, wanted to get back at him for the loss of happiness with the man she loved. She confessed that she was deeply in love with Christopher and felt that her spouse deprived her of the opportunity to be happy. She never could come to terms with the loss and the pain she felt on a daily basis. Kelly hated her husband for what he had forced her to do and realized she couldn't continue to live peacefully with it.
The opportunity for a crime came on February 22, 2016, when Jason complained of back pain. Kelly talked him into giving him a shot with a medication. The dose of the medication was too high, but for some reason it didn't work properly. Seeing that her husband was still breathing, Kelly suffocated Jason by covering his mouth and nose with her hands. Later, just in case, Kelly squeezed his neck to make sure her husband was already dead. This explained the appearance of bruises on the victim's body. After Kelly Cochran's testimony, she actively cooperated with police to help determine where Christopher's remains were buried. On May 18, 2016, Detective Jeremy Ogden, along with a team of investigators and a canine team, went to a site near the village of Crystal Falls. This seldom visited neighborhood had become the hiding place of a terrible mystery. The team of investigators began a thorough sweep of the woods around the lake, each member carefully penetrating between the trees. One of the canine dogs suddenly detected a faint odor and led the officers forward. All the other officers followed the dog tensely, expecting the reveal to be close. The dog led the group to an unassuming hill littered with fallen leaves and branches. Clearing it, the investigators found objects. One of them was unmistakably a human skull. Upon closer examination, it was obvious that the victim had been murdered. The bullet hole spoke for itself. Investigators had no doubt that they had discovered Christopher's severed head. Also found at the scene was a .22 caliber bullet, a broken gun, and glasses that probably belonged to Reagan. Dental records were used to identify the victim's remains. The missing person case that had plagued investigators for 2 years was finally solved. In April 2016, Kelly Cochran was formally charged with the murders of Christopher Reagan and Jason Cochran. On February 13, 2017, the 34-year-old criminal was arraigned in Michigan State Court. The prosecutor emphasized that Kelly significantly diminishes her role by being the mastermind behind both crimes. He argued that Christopher viewed his relationship with Kelly as an occasional encounter, while she genuinely loved him and planned a future with him. Christopher's refusal to have a serious relationship with her led to rage, and Kelly decided to kill him by making up a story about a pact with her husband. The prosecution had strong evidence, including Kelly's confession. In court, however, she presented a different version. According to her, she was being abused by her jealous husband, who arranged the crime. He hid in the basement that day and caught the lovers off guard. Then he grabbed a gun in a rage and shot Christopher. The idea of dismembering the body was Jason's suggestion, and he coerced Kelly into helping by threatening to kill him. The new version made the jury wonder about Kelly's guilt. They deliberated for 3 hours and still reached their verdict. Kelly was found guilty of the premeditated murder of Christopher Reagan. She was given a life sentence without parole. Jason Cochran's case did not go to trial, as a plea agreement was reached, and Kelly was sentenced to 65 years in prison. From the courtroom, Kelly Cochran was sent straight to Crown Point Correctional Facility in Ypsilanti, Michigan. There she is, serving her sentence, and only regrets that her personal life did not work out. In one phone interview, Kelly stated, "I tried to do what I thought was right. You go to school, you go to college, then you get married," Kelly Cochran shares in an interview. "It was good in the beginning, but in the end, all my efforts were in vain. All I did was work all the time while my husband entertained himself with computer games."
Within the prison walls, Kelly continues to reveal details of her creamies. She claims that she and Jason committed more creamies and Christopher is just one of their many victims. The details, names, and additional crimes Kelly does not disclose make it difficult to corroborate her words. Kelly's brother has also heard from her that there were more victims, but there is no concrete evidence to back that up at this time. Detective Jeremy Ogden of the Hobart, Indiana Police Department is scrutinizing the details, hoping to uncover some clues and find evidence of other possible crimes committed by Kelly and Jason Cochran, in hopes that this additional evidence will help close a chapter in this dark story.
Life in an orphanage is not the best. You don't have your own corner, you don't have your own time, and if you can't fight back, you get beaten up by those who have been here for a long time. Amanda and Anna Marie McClure are a little luckier than the others. When there are two of you, the likelihood of fighting back increases. Besides, these juvenile aggressors only pick on loners. The sisters were comfortable alone, and they did not try to get acquainted with anyone. They hoped that their stay in this hell would not be long. Soon their mother would find out that their father had been imprisoned, which meant that the girls were sent to an orphanage, from which they should be taken away as soon as possible. It is impossible not to find out that their father, Larry McClure, was sent to prison. It was talked about on TV and written in newspapers for a long time. Time passed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. It became clear that we could forget about returning home. One day the sisters rescued a newcomer, Meredith, from being bullied. The girl lived with her drug-addicted mother, was very thin, frightened, and flinched at any rustle. She came to the shelter after her mother died of an overdose, and Meredith herself was afraid to call the emergency services, so she lived with her body for a few days. One day a friend came to visit her mother, and upon finding her friend dead, called emergency services from a payphone so as not to be involved in any way. Meredith became a friend to the McClure sisters, the three of them becoming more fun and safer. Amanda and Anne Marie had never told anyone the reason they were here. Meredith had asked about it once, but Anne Marie had brushed it off and blurted out something about a policeman father who had tried to apprehend a dangerous criminal but had been killed on the job. Amanda listened to the story with her eyes wide open, but her sister gave her a look that told her to stay out of it. Enraptured by their father's posthumous deed, Meredith told about the sisters' fate to the other students of the orphanage, and in an instant the sisters turned into real stars. They were respected, they were envied, because most of those who were here had parents who either died from illegal substances or went to prison. Eventually, all the children wanted to be friends with the sisters, and their reclusive life came to an end. Unfortunately, this beautiful life, albeit in an orphanage, quickly came to an end. Unknown from where the information appeared that the father of Anne-Marie and Amanda is not a dead policeman at all, but on the contrary, a living criminal, serving time in prison for violent acts of a sexual nature towards a young girl. Then the fate of the sisters turned into a real hell. However, after a while they were lucky. Fortunately, 2 different families decided to adopt the girls almost simultaneously, and they got the opportunity to start a new life. But however, already separately, the connection between them broke and was lost. There are no details about the sisters' life in foster homes. Amanda and Anna Marie could remain in this story only children of the rapist, but their adult life flowed into the most high-profile case of the state of Virginia. Amanda is known to be married to 38-year-old John McGuire. They met when she was already 29 years old. Her adoptive parents even began to worry that Amanda would be a loner for the rest of her life, and the lack of biological family, including the betrayal of her mother, had a negative impact on her psyche. The foster parents breathed a sigh of relief only when Amanda admitted to them that she had a young man with whom they were going to get married. It was the second wedding for John, and he also had 2 sons from his first marriage. Anne-Marie had never been able to build her family. One could be happy for Amanda. She really could have a strong and loving family. John was an incredibly positive guy. What could be said against it, if even with his ex-wife they had a warm and friendly relationship? After a while, the sisters' father, Larry McClure, was released on parole. Settling still in the same Virginia in a mobile home, he made no small effort to find his daughters.
The first place he went was to Amanda's foster parents, Gwenham and Alex. Larry went straight to their house, said hello, introduced himself, said he wanted to see his daughter and asked for her contacts, address and phone number. Outwardly, he looked very bad, even frightening, deep wrinkles all over his face, huge bags under his eyes, and besides, as it seemed to them, he was not sober. No, he didn't smell of alcohol, and he didn't stagger from side to side on shaky legs, but in general his behavior was not adequate. Glenn refused Larry's request, but promised that they would be sure to tell Amanda that her biological father was looking for her. Larry had been really freaked out when he'd heard the phrase biological father, but he'd thanked him and left. Glenn had indeed kept his word. He had told Amanda that her father was free and looking for her. In the back of Amanda's mind, there was a demon who denied everything and advised to send her father to hell, and an angel who advised to give her father, though a criminal, another chance. The angel won, though it was unclear who was better to listen to. First, Amanda called her father. He said he was very happy to hear from her, asked how she was doing. She told him that she was doing well, married and feeling happy. Larry was happy for his daughter and suggested that she come over for a joint dinner with her husband. Amanda didn't realize if she should live to see her father, but it was as if he knew just what to push. Come on, forget the old grudges. I have lived all these years with only one thought, to see you and Anne-Marie. Anna, unlike you, must have missed me after all. You've already seen her? Amanda wondered. Of course I have. We went on a nature trip with her and had a wonderful time, like a real family, like father and daughter. It was like those years of separation never happened. She also asked a lot about you. If Amanda didn't know how to deal with her father, she wanted to see her sister, who had been separated from her in the orphanage almost 20 years ago, and so she agreed. In the case file, there is no description of their first meeting, but 2 facts are known. Larry lied about Anne-Marie. At that time, she lived in North Carolina, which is 186 miles from Virginia, and Larry had never seen or spoken to her. And so, father and daughter met. Their meetings led to Larry getting Amanda and John hooked on illegal substances that he brewed himself in his camper. Larry literally used the daughter and son-in-law before meeting the father. The financial situation of the couple was stable, but Larry pulled money from them for the production of illegal substances, and when Amanda and John lost their jobs because of their addiction, Larry persuaded John to register because drug addicts received help from the state in the amount of $180, which were still not enough to buy substances and ingredients. That's when Anna Marie appears in the story, and Larry uses her in the same way. He gets her hooked on substances and pulls money out of her. Amanda and John find themselves at an impasse. They have no jobs. Because of huge debts, they lose their house, and the only way to stay afloat is to move into Larry's camper. John's folks at this point still had no idea. He called his parents. His mother was seriously ill at the time. John informed them that he and Amanda were going on a trip together. That was the last time John's parents heard their son alive. In fact, no trip was planned. Amanda and John moved in with Larry, where they engaged in a small circle of illicit substance use and alcohol consumption. The whole tragedy occurred on Valentine's Day. John, who rarely recovered from the effects of illegal substances, was still madly in love with Amanda and decided to prepare a surprise for her, a festive evening in the family circle. He bought meat and alcohol, cooked a fancy dinner, at which, in addition to his wife, of course, were Larry and Anne Marie. Under the prolonged influence of the drugs, a terrible madness occurred in the family. Amanda and Larry became much closer than father and daughter. Unfortunately, John couldn't see it coming. Yes, you all thought right. Father and daughter considered themselves a couple. Therefore, John was now redundant.
During the meal, John spoke very many warm words to Amanda, and Larry was insanely nervous about it, and the tension grew. Eventually, Larry interrupted his son-in-law's speech and asked him if he could be completely honest with his wife. The man replied in agreement. Then Larry proposed a game. John's legs were tied, and he was asked to answer honestly all the questions that related to his past life. Yes, at first, the questions were really harmless. Childhood, school, university, and all that. But at some point, Larry, under the influence of drugs, began to accuse John that he was an undercover FBI agent, and when John denied it, they started beating him up. It ended when John, begging for mercy and covering himself with his children, tried to untie his legs and had a bottle of wine smashed over his head. Yes, it was the same wine he'd bought for the family dinner. Larry, Amanda, and Anne Marie tortured John for 2 days and used illegal substances in parallel. Finally, when they had had enough, Amanda pulled a black bag over her husband's head and squeezed it around his neck until he stopped breathing. John was buried in the backyard, after which the crazy family celebrated the engagement of Larry and Amanda, father and daughter, and naturally it had to be celebrated with a new batch of psychotropic substances and alcohol. On the 3rd day, their psyche went haywire. They began to see John's ghost, police sirens, and the ground in which they buried John seemed to them unearthed, as if John was able to get out of there, escape, and report everything to the police. It sounds wild and crazy, but the crazy father and daughters decided to back up. They dug up John's body, checked his pulse, and even his pupil's reaction to flashlight light, even though the body, for all its biological signs, was already in the decomposition stage, but that didn't seem enough to them. To prevent John from coming back to life and escaping, they cut his body into pieces with a wood axe and drove an aspen stake into each piece of his body. The remains were reburied in different places and covered with lime to speed up the decomposition process. 3 weeks later, Larry and Amanda were married. Larry changed his name so that no one would know they were related. The new family decided to start a new life. To do this, they moved to Kentucky and agreed to stop using illegal substances once and for all. In the rented house, to hide all suspicion from themselves, they even hung a U.S. flag over the door to the house, just like their neighbors did. By this time, John's ex-wife and parents began to worry that he wasn't making contact. And in 2019, John's mother even filed a police report about his disappearance. As for Larry, he failed to notify the police that he had moved from one state to another, and that was against the terms of his probation, which is why he went back behind bars. In prison, Larry's psyche finally failed. It's hard to expect anything good when you've been using illegal substances for a long time, mixing them with alcohol, and then, at the snap of your fingers, you find yourself in a place where you can't get them. Withdrawal syndrome works. Increased nervousness, lack of boundaries between reality and fantasy. It's pretty clear if you marry your own daughter. Larry was pretty sure that the parole violation was just an excuse to dig up the backyard and find the remains of John's body. He urgently needed to contact Amanda or Anna Marie and tell them to have his daughters dig up the body parts and rebury them somewhere far from home. All prisoner calls are always tapped, so the information had to be conveyed in a veiled manner. Larry even prepared a speech and thought of everything in detail, but the problem was that he was denied calls. Finally, he couldn't stand it any longer, called the policeman on duty, and told him he had something to confess. Larry's logic was that if he confessed to the murder before he was charged, he could avoid at least the death penalty. And if he blamed it on his daughters, yeah, that would be even better. The cop didn't even believe Larry at first. What murder? What body parts buried in the backyard? What was this lunatic's idea? Why would this junkie dig his own grave? But by law, the man's word had to be verified. At first, the check wanted to organize only formally. Yes, there was a statement. Yes, the place was checked. No, nothing was found.
But then it turned out that John is really considered missing, and just in case, to the place of Larry's residence, sent a police detachment. First on the ground, they found traces of the lime that Larry had mentioned, and then absolutely all the words of the criminal were confirmed. The McClure sisters were apprehended immediately. Amanda and Anna Marie were in shock and simply could not believe that their father, and for someone else and husband, could confess to such a brutal murder. They were even more shocked when they learned that Larry tried to make himself an innocent sheep, and in his testimony indicated that it was his daughters killed John, and he was only an unwitting participant in the crime. Then each of the family began to save their own skin and to convince the police that it was just him in this terrible story was an accident. It was especially hard for John's relatives in this situation, since his body, in fact, there was no body and there were only remains. These remains had to be taken from the criminalists, transported to his parents and buried in a closed coffin. It has been mentioned many times that John was a very nice guy, so despite all the difficulties, his parents were able to bury him. Some of his friends helped with money, some with transportation, some with funeral arrangements. John was buried in a Lutheran church on October 25, 2019. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, someone in the McClure family posted a Facebook post on John's behalf that he was leaving on a trip where he would not be able to be in touch for a long time and asked his friends not to worry about his long absence. This indicated that the crazy family knew that they were going to kill the poor guy soon, so they misled everyone so that the family wouldn't start sounding the alarm. Despite such a brutal crime, for the duration of the trial, Larry and Amanda had 6 months added to their sentence for the marriage of a daughter and father. As such, marriages are criminalized in the state. The trial began. Larry was given the floor. I have felt remorse for my own children for most of my life. Yes, when they were very young, I committed a serious crime that put them in an orphanage. Their birth mother abandoned them, and I was the only one who had a heartache for my little ones. I am extremely grateful to the people who adopted my babies. I will not hide. I even attended churches and prayed for their adoptive parents when I got out. I crazily wanted to make up for all the years I had missed. That's probably why I acted the way I did. I mean, I could have walked away from the crime if I'd convinced Amanda not to do it. But I confess, I didn't. Mr. Judge and jury will probably not understand me, and I share their point of view. But the thing is, they weren't in my shoes. John was a fine young man. I feel sorry for him. If I could, I would turn things around. But no one can raise the dead, and I couldn't say no to Amanda, my favorite and youngest daughter. But she didn't care about John. All she wanted was to be able to withdraw government money from John's account. Have you ever been willing to kill a man for $180? No? Then if you don't understand me as a father, you should understand what kind of person she is. She's a monster, not a person. Me, Amanda, and Marie, we are overly addicted to illegal drugs, so we deserve to be punished. I want to address the jury. No matter what sentence you choose for me, I'm sober about my health and say that I can't live more than 10 years. I'm very sorry for this situation, and I apologize to all of John's loved ones. Again, he was a great guy. The trial went on for a very long time as the defendants flip-flopped back and forth on the decision to kill John. Amanda, who could not tolerate such a long trial, even made a deal with the investigators where she was promised to be charged with involuntary manslaughter. At the next trial, Larry gave a very different speech. When it all started, the four of us bought the ingredients to make illegal substances and went back to my trailer where I started making them. Amanda came up to me and said she wanted to get back at John. The fact is that John, under the influence of the drugs, raped Anna Marie and she got pregnant. And as for me, I had to earn the trust of my daughters after all these years apart. I couldn't refuse, I blame myself for that. I think every day that I should hang myself. But why should it be me? If this crime is their fault. After Larry's speech, John's family got the floor. His mother sobbed non-stop, so much so that she couldn't say a word. Even if I can ever forgive the McClure family, I will never be able to forget what happened. Also, know that I wish I could live to see the day when one of them dies before me. Then John's children were given the floor, who literally cursed the killers and said they would never forgive them. The judge handed down the final verdict, which sentenced Larry McClure to life in prison without parole. When the punishment for Amanda was announced, her adoptive parents were very sorry that they did confess to their daughter that she was wanted by her father. They had brought her up with freedom of choice all her life, but they did not know that this freedom could have such an impact on her future fate. Amanda, in turn, during the announcement of the verdict, said that all this is the fault of her father, who could not survive the feeling of jealousy. Amanda's poor parents asked the judge to consider that if it were not for the negative influence of her father, their adopted daughter would never have gone to such a brutal crime. However, prosecutors viewed the murder as a conspiracy so that Amanda and Larry could be together as a couple. The first hearing was dedicated to Amanda, and she was sentenced to 40 years. But the judge noted that she would probably be behind bars for only 20 years. When the sentence was read to Anne Marie, she tried her best to prove that she was against John's murder, but she was forced to go to the end by her father and sister. And she was a witness at the wedding of Larry and Amanda only because she was afraid for her future life. In the end, Anne Marie was sentenced to 40 years in prison. The Kaylor family case. Can this crime be justified by a nervous disorder? In 1995, Kansas passed a law stating that an offender who committed a premeditated crime could not blame his actions on a mental disorder that made him unable to distinguish right from wrong. This law was passed because almost every criminal, when brought to trial, tried to avoid punishment by claiming that he was not in control of his actions or did not realize the consequences because of a mental disorder. The head of the once happy and large Kaylor family tried to use insanity as a defense to avoid responsibility for the atrocities he committed. However, he was found sane. Psychologists believe that his actions were motivated by jealousy, rage, and a desire for revenge against the ex-wife who left him and the daughters who supported their mother. Unfortunately, such crimes motivated by jealousy and a pathological desire for revenge are a common worldwide phenomenon. According to statistics, these motives account for 1 in 8 crimes committed. Excessive suspicion, insecurity, and obsessive need to control a partner can turn a person into a real beast who does not spare even his own children. The story of the Kaylor family. James Craig Kaylor was born in 1963 in Weatherford, Texas. His future wife, Karen Kaylor, née White, was born in the same city in 1965. They met in the early 1980s as students at a Texas university. Craig was graduating in engineering, and Karen was a freshman in the humanities department. They quickly found common ground and soon began a romantic relationship. They were young, in love, and seemed like the perfect couple. Craig was a top student known for his determination and talent in engineering. In the late 1980s, after graduation, they had a modest wedding attended only by close friends and family. Their first child, Emily, was born in 1991, followed by Lauren in 1993. They lived in a cozy house in Weatherford and were quite well off by local standards. In 1999, when Karen was pregnant with her third child, Craig received a lucrative job offer at a large utility company in Weatherford. His promotion coincided with the birth of their son, Sean, whom he adored. With a higher income, Craig bought a spacious house in the city's most prestigious neighborhood and a reliable family car. Karen stayed at home, and Craig became the primary breadwinner. Outwardly, the family seemed perfect. The daughters, Emily and Lauren, were talented in sports and music, often participating in vocal competitions and local events. Emily excelled in school and went to a prestigious pharmacy college, while Lauren, an excellent student, dreamed of attending a conservatory to pursue a career in music. Sean was an outgoing, kind, and inquisitive boy, interested in numismatics and aspiring to become an archaeologist. He was very close to his parents and sisters. Craig provided for his family. Karen made the home comfortable, raised the children, and baked tasty treats. They were active in the community, striving to improve their neighborhood. They also raised 3 wonderful and talented children. However, behind the facade of perfection, there were many problems that family members kept hidden. In 2007, Karen admitted to her younger sister Linda that she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She complained that Craig had been controlling and monitoring her for years, and that this control was increasing. Craig demanded a full accounting of all expenditures, not just major purchases, but everyday household expenses as well. Karen provided him with supermarket receipts, bank transaction data, and reported her whereabouts every day while he was at work. The entire Kaylor family lived on a strict schedule set by Craig. When he returned from work, his wife and children had to be home to meet him. They went to bed, woke up, and ate at certain times, and even intimacy between the couple was scheduled. Over time, Craig's obsession with control intensified. He became increasingly demanding and selfish, and Karen's actions were scheduled down to the hour. Karen felt enslaved. She had no free time, only duties and responsibilities. She tried to fulfill all of her husband's demands, hoping that he would loosen his control and they could get back to their old life, but Craig seemed to enjoy his control and was unwilling to change. Linda was deeply disturbed by her sister's revelations. She, like everyone else, had seen Craig as the perfect husband, father, and family man, and it turned out he was a domestic tyrant. However, Karen did not want to destroy her family. Besides, she and her children were financially dependent on Craig. Therefore, she decided to find a job that would provide her with a stable income. Karen's new hobby. Karen, despite her advanced age and 3 children, was in great physical shape. She always adhered to the principles of good nutrition, periodically followed diets, took care of herself, and went jogging every day. Secretly from her husband, she enrolled in a local fitness club where she started working out for several hours every day. It was her way of blowing off steam, distracting herself and getting her thoughts in order. She attended the gym while Craig was at work and didn't notice her working out. Soon the management of the sports club noticed the attractive, fit, and diligent woman. Karen was offered to try herself as a fitness instructor with a probationary period and the possibility of an official labor contract. The former housewife could not have dreamed of such an opportunity because now she will be able to continue doing what she loves and even receive a decent remuneration for it. Eventually, Craig found out that his wife was going to the gym. Karen expected a scandal and that her husband would forbid her to go, but surprisingly, he reacted calmly. He even seemed pleased that his wife had found something to do and was now earning her own money. His only conditions were that she had to be home when he arrived, cook meals, and not disrupt their planned intimate life. Karen found these conditions acceptable because now she had the freedom of action and the ability to provide for her own needs without having to justify to her husband every dime she spent. Unexpected romance and a love triangle. Soon there was a new instructor at the fitness club named Sonny Rice. Karen and Sonny quickly hit it off and became friends. For Karen, who had been a stay-at-home mom for many years and was unable to socialize with people outside the family, Sonny became a trusted confidant. The women spent time together at work every day, sometimes going for walks, drinking coffee, and having heart-to-heart talks. It didn't take long for their friendship to grow into something more. Naturally, they hid their feelings and relationship from everyone. But in time, Karen decided that she had to confess everything to her husband. She spent months preparing for this conversation, trying to find the right words, not knowing how to start and what the consequences might be. Eventually, she opened up to Craig. Although Craig was quite puzzled by his wife's revelation, he reacted rather calmly and did not make a scene. However, the next day, Craig stated that he agreed to his wife's relationship with Sonny, but on the condition that he could join them. Karen was shocked by her husband's proposal and didn't know how to react to it. Nevertheless, Craig took the initiative and began courting Sonny, sending her flowers and small gifts. He seemed to see this as an opportunity to brighten his intimate life and add passion and new sensations to his marriage to Karen. At first, the women agreed to his proposal, but soon realized that for Craig it was a game of dominance. Their peculiar love triangle didn't last long, and Craig was made to realize that he was not welcome in their relationship. Feeling insulted, Craig demanded that Karen end the affair immediately, but she continued to date Sonny, genuinely in love. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, it seemed that Karen was ready to leave her husband for a new relationship.
A move to another state and secret meetings. After months of scandals, confrontations, and agonizing deliberation, Craig decided that the best solution to save his family would be to move to another state. He began looking for a new job, sending out resumes, and soon landed a position as a water director for a large company in Columbia, Missouri, a city neighboring Kansas. Craig believed that his wife's move to another state would end her affair with Sonny and their family life would return to normal. The move in the summer of 2008 proved difficult for the family, as the children had to change schools, make new friends, and adjust to life in a new city. Although the family was already well off, Craig's salary in his new position was nearly double what he earned in Weatherford. However, with more responsibilities and more hours on the job, Craig naively thought he had cut Sonny out of his wife's life for good, but he was wrong. Karen and Sonny continued to communicate regularly, exchanging calls and texts and meeting in secret. They would drive to meet halfway and spend a couple hours in a roadside hotel before returning home. By then, Karen knew her marriage was doomed. She no longer loved her husband, and divorce was only a matter of time. These secret trysts continued until December 2008. On that New Year's Eve, the Kaylor family returned to their hometown to visit family and friends. Sonny was also present at this party. Karen and Sonny behaved low-key at first, simply exchanging greetings. However, as the party progressed and under the influence of alcohol, they seemed to forget about social norms. The lovers were inseparable, holding hands, exchanging longing glances, and some guests even caught them kissing. Craig wasn't just angry, he was furious. Karen had insulted and humiliated him in front of dozens of former roommates, friends, and co-workers, making her affair public. Craig made a scene at the party, verbally attacking his wife and Sonny. An enraged Craig forcibly dragged Karen away from the party. On the way home, he lost control of himself. He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her with such force that her dress ripped. He then slapped her, causing her to stumble and fall, hitting her head hard. Divorce and painful harassment. After returning home, the conflict did not subside, and a few days later, Karen told Craig that she was leaving him. She initiated divorce proceedings and demanded custody of the children. At first, Craig tried to apologize, begging to keep the family for the sake of the children and offering to give their marriage another chance. However, Karen was adamant and obtained a divorce. Craig then began calling their mutual friends and relatives, asking them to talk to Karen and convince her not to break up the family and stay with him. Despite his best efforts, she firmly told him that she was leaving for Sonny and was never truly happy in their marriage. In the early spring of 2009, while they were still living under the same roof, another argument broke out, and Craig resorted to physical violence for the first time since that New Year's Eve party. Karen reported him to the police and he was arrested. However, at the station, he claimed that his wife was hysterical and he only held her tightly to calm her down, which caused the bruises on her arms. After this incident, Karen, without waiting for an official divorce, took the children and moved out. For Craig, it was a serious blow, but even more he was angry when he learned that his daughters sided with their mother, saying that for the first time in a long time saw her happy. He saw this as a betrayal and refused to communicate with Emily and Lauren, only calling Sean and taking him with him on weekends, while blatantly ignoring his daughters. Meanwhile, despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, Craig still hoped that his wife would change her mind and come back to him. He was jealous, tried to control her, and followed her everywhere. He watched her house, followed her around town in a rental car trying to remain undetected, and even tried to set up a hidden camera in her house when no one was there. Naturally, all of this took time and effort, so Craig had to sacrifice work. First, he took a vacation, then he claimed that he was sick, and in the end, he just started skipping work without explanation. This reckless behavior led to his termination. After losing his job and source of income, Craig was forced to move into his parents' house because he couldn't afford his own. Now, with plenty of free time, he was able to stalk his ex-wife all day long, leading her to take his ex-husband to court to stop him from approaching her. Horrible Thanksgiving. In November 2009, just before Thanksgiving, Karen took her children to visit her 89-year-old grandmother, Dorothy White, in the small town of Burlingame, Kansas, to spend the vacations. On the evening of November 29th, the Burlingame Police Department received an alarm call about a suspicious van and the sound of gunshots. Dorothy's neighbors reported seeing a small truck pull up to the elderly woman's home, a man get out of it and enter the house. They then allegedly heard screams and gunshots, but are not sure. The man then left the house, got back into the truck, and drove away quickly. Neighbors did not attempt to apprehend him, fearing he was armed. When police pulled up to the house, they were met by a terrified 10-year-old boy calling for help. It was Sean Kaylor, who couldn't explain what had happened, but it was clear that a terrifying scene awaited the police inside. Near the front door, they found the 89-year-old homeowner lying in a pool of blood and surprisingly alive despite 2 gunshot wounds. In the kitchen, police found the lifeless body of 44-year-old Karen. She had been shot in the chest and then killed by a close-range gunshot to the head. Her ex-husband had left her with no chance of survival. The body of her oldest daughter, 18-year-old Emily, lay between a wall and a couch. She had apparently tried to hide from her enraged father, but he caught up with her and took her life with 2 point-blank shots. Her younger sister, Lauren, lay in a pool of blood in a second-floor bedroom. She was still alive, begging faintly to save her life and repeatedly stating that her father had done it. The elderly woman and Lauren were immediately rushed to the intensive care unit of a nearby hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts, their lives could not be saved. Lauren died on the morning of December 1st from massive blood loss and damage to her internal organs, and her great-grandmother died a few hours later that day. The only surviving witness. Sean was in a state of shock. Psychologists worked with him, but he needed a thorough interrogation as the only living witness to the tragic events at his great-grandmother's house. He said that evening his mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and he approached her to ask for his favorite pies. Suddenly, the back door of the house swung open and their father entered the house with a shotgun in his hands. Without saying a word, the man pointed the barrel at his ex-wife and shot her, then moved closer and fired again. For the first few seconds, Sean froze in horror. Then his father turned to him, but didn't aim, just silently and intently stared at him. Sean realized he had to run, so he jumped out the open back door. The boy ran toward the main entrance, hoping to alert his grandmother and sisters and call for help. However, as he reached the threshold, he heard several more gunshots. Fearing to enter the house, he hid in a small outbuilding. He heard several more shots and waited in terror for his father to come after him. Where is Mr. Kaylor? Craig was immediately put on the wanted list, warning that he was armed and extremely dangerous. Meanwhile, police received several reports of a speeding truck, which helped them quickly determine the direction the gunman was traveling. At one point, the man abandoned his vehicle in a wooded area and began walking down a deserted road. Law enforcement quickly caught up with him and apprehended him the next morning. He had left the rifle and ammunition in the back seat, with prescription medication for depression and anxiety disorders lying next to the driver's seat. Mr. Kaylor did not resist arrest. He did not seem to care anymore. He looked confused and even frightened, and honestly admitted that he was armed with a gun and a hunting knife, but did not intend to use them.
He also admitted that he had done something terrible that he believed the police already knew about. At first, when he was taken to the police station, Craig fully admitted his guilt and poured his heart out to the investigating officer. He told how his wife had cheated on him with Sonny, how they had humiliated him in front of his friends at a New Year's Eve party, how his attempts to save his marriage had cost him his job, and what was left of his self-respect. The man cried, said he did not know how he had decided to take such a step, and complained that everyone, including his daughters, had betrayed him. Trial and fair sentence. Craig's trial began in December 2010. The defendant, who was advised by his lawyer Thomas Heaney, recanted his initial confession, blaming his actions on mental illness and insanity. It was his only option to avoid the death penalty for the murder of 4 people. Heaney tried to convince the court that his client was in a difficult psycho-emotional state after his wife left him for a lover. His children sided with their mother. He lost his job and was forced to move back into his parents' home. All of these factors contributed to the breakdown, the lawyer said, and Mr. Kaylor committed the crime while insane, not realizing what he was doing. Prior to 1995, there was indeed a law that allowed criminals to get leniency by pleading insanity. However, in Kansas, where the crime was committed and the trial took place, that law was repealed. Furthermore, the prosecution found no evidence of insanity, or affective state in Craig's actions, only cold calculation. He purchased guns and ammunition in advance, went to Dorothy White's house, knowing that his entire family was there. He shot each victim twice, leaving no chance of survival. However, he deliberately spared his son, Sean, allowing him to escape. In August 2011, the man was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. Sean, who was 12 years old at the time, testified at the final hearing. He said that he did not wish his father dead, as he was the only close relative left. Despite numerous appeals by Craig and his attorneys, the verdict remained unchanged. As of today, Mr. Kaylor is still in prison and continues to fight to have the case reviewed and the death sentence overturned. As for Sean, after the death of his mother and sisters, he was officially taken into custody by his maternal grandmother. He is now an adult, has finished school, received an education, and has decided to stay and work in his home state.